So, today I want to talk about the Biden administration's two faced approach to climate change. President Biden has talked a very big game on the climate since well before he was elected. A lot of his campaign promises centered around ideas of green energy and the jobs that would come with it, a reduction of drilling on federal land, and an overall reduction in carbon emissions during his presidency. Now, he's constantly putting on this face of someone who wants to speak against climate change. He delivers speeches that talk about the reduction of carbon emissions, about holding corporations accountable on methane production, and investing in clean energy. And of course, while he's making all these wonderful claims, his actions speak quite to the contrary. And to be honest, we should have already known that his policies would be inadequate, as he wants all of this done by the milquetoast goal of 2050, with net emissions reaching zero at that time. And that is far too late if we're looking at any of the recent reports, and any of the reports he would have been quite aware of during his campaign. Now, most recently, President Biden spoke at the UN on Tuesday and talked about being a leader to the world on the topic of climate now that the United States has stopped its forever war, its 20-year position of being at war in Afghanistan. And so when we look at that, what he's basically trying to do here is when Biden pledges to help with the global climate crisis, he's really talking about throwing money at the problem and not in a way that is substantial at all. US President Joe Biden told the United Nations General Assembly on Tuesday that he would work with Congress to double funds by 2024 to $11.4 billion per year to help developing nations deal with climate change. The funding would help achieve a global goal set more than a decade ago of $100 billion per year to support climate action in vulnerable countries by 2020. The problem with this is that we have seen, based on the IPCC report and a lot of the other reports that have come out about the climate, and what we've witnessed just in this past year alone, that a lot of these issues are getting exacerbated a lot faster than we originally thought. And so, hitting a goal that we were supposed to hit by 2020 and having that money reach by 2024 isn't exactly solving the problem. And throwing the money at disaster relief and not actual prevention of these disasters isn't going to fix things either. And as a matter of fact, I think that this is an underwhelming position for the Biden administration to take. Furthermore, I don't know how he's going to get Congress to act on anything, given that Manchin and Sinema are just going to block everything as it is. And by 2024, he might not even be in a position to do anything. So this is really kind of an empty promise. But yet, the US is going to lead on this, even though they can't handle their own situation. And as we look through this, President Biden's commitment to scaling up international climate finance to $11.4 billion a year by 2024 is welcome and much needed sign that the U.S. is finally taking its global climate responsibilities seriously, said Rachel Cletus, policy director at the Union of Concerned Scientists. I completely disagree with that statement. The fact of the matter is that it's not enough. The EU has put in almost double that, and in addition to that, the areas of the world that are going to be most affected are the developing nations, meaning that when it comes to all of this, this is just going to be a drop in a bucket to try to fix what is already done in terms of damage. They are trying to address the wound, not prevent it. And that is another huge issue, especially given that the United States is still the second biggest greenhouse gas emitter. And again, this is falling way short of any of those goals. Furthermore, Biden had announced that the US and the European Union have launched a global pledge to reduce emissions of methane, a potent greenhouse gas, by nearly 30% by the end of the decade. And again, based on a lot of the reports, that's not enough. Even if he was doing everything that he promised here, this would still not be enough. This will not only rapidly reduce the rate of global warming, but it will also produce a very valuable side benefit like improving public health and agricultural output, Biden said. We're mobilizing support to help developing countries that join the pledge to do something significant. The thing is, developing countries are not the ones causing the bulk of the problem. The US is a big problem in all of this. It's an issue where they're trying to say, oh, well, everyone else has to fix the problem, but we're not fixing the problem on our own end. And this is a systemic issue that goes beyond anything that single individuals or tiny nations can actually do to stop this. It has to be a global effort. And if the US really wanted to lead, it would lead by example. And as we see, they're not. Because as of July 12th, there was an article put out by Associated Press that talks about how the US drilling approvals increase despite Biden's climate pledge. We have here that the approvals for companies to drill for oil and gas in the United States on public lands are on pace this year to reach their highest level since George W. Bush was president, underscoring President Joe Biden's reluctance to move forcefully to curb petroleum production in the face of industry and Republican resistance. The Interior Department approved more than 2,500 permits to drill on public and tribal land in the first 6 months of the year, according to the Associated Press analysis of government data. That includes more than 2,100 drilling approvals since Biden took office in January of 2021. So on January 20th, since then, there's been 2,100 drilling approvals done by the Department of the Interior. Now, Biden campaigned last year on pledges of ending drilling, like I said before. And of course, we're seeing the exact opposite, with the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, being adamantly opposed to drilling on federal land, but also approving it behind everything else. Now, they are making the argument in this article that it's complicated because Biden's climate agenda is, being put on hold because of the increase in gasoline prices to over $3 a gallon or 79 cents a liter, or more in certain parts of the country. Any attempt to limit petroleum production could push gasoline prices even higher and risk souring economic recovery from the pandemic. Now, there's a lot of things that can be done here. There could have been subsidies to help people pay for that gasoline. You could have put more money in people's pockets. You could have funded people in other ways that would have made that $3 a gallon not as big of a deal. You could have used that as a deal breaker and leverage to say, well, gas costs are going to go up if the production goes down, so we're going to need to invest doubly in green energy to produce other things. There are ways that he could have done this if he wanted to take it seriously. Instead, he's capitulating to a lot of the corporate interests and trying to drive the prices down and thinking about immediate short-term gains rather than the actual issues that the climate is literally on fire. Meanwhile, Deb Haaland has sought to tamp down Republican concerns over potential constraints on the industry. She said during a House Natural Resources Committee hearing last month that there was no plan right now for a permanent ban, which is exactly what needs to happen. There needs to be a permanent ban on new drilling sources. That needs to stop. That is quite evident based on the projections that have been put out by the IPCC. Gas and oil production will continue well into the future, and we believe that that is the reality of our economy and the world we're living in, Haaland told Colorado Republican Representative Doug Lamborn. And the one thing that she's right about here is this is a reality of the economy and the world we're living in. This is what neoliberalism and neocolonialism and capitalism have done. This is what the present economic situation of the world is. It's why we need to explore models of degrowth. It's why we need to explore alternative methods. It's why we need to start looking in the direction of really reversing all of this sooner rather than later. A lot of the damage that's been done, we've reached a point where at least a degree Celsius of increased temperatures from the Industrial Revolution is guaranteed, probably closer to 1.5 to 2, and that's going to cause massive amounts of issues, including seacoast rising, massive flooding, more forest fires, increased temperatures, and all of the things and disasters that we've seen over the past year becoming far more commonplace. The odds of them happening are just going to keep increasing. And in the meantime, we're sitting here talking about, well, our hands are tied. We can't do anything. The economy is the way that it is. Capitalism is the reality, and that's what we have to deal with. No, we could reverse course very easily. We could change things very quickly. We could make a lot of different models come about if we just put the funding into dealing with it and changing the way that we look at the world and the climate and the economy. But that's not something we're interested in because we need to protect private interests and capital and not the needs of people and the environment. If the recent trends continue, the Interior Department could actually issue close to 6,000 permits by the end of the year. The last time so many were issued was fiscal year 2008, amid an oil boom driven by crude prices that reached an all-time high of $140 per barrel that June. And that's where we're sitting, with the Biden administration putting on a great clean face on the one hand, giving all these speeches talking about how we need to fix things, we need to reduce emissions, we're going to lead the world, we're going to run things, we're going to be the best, like the US always claims to be in its path of exceptionalism. But on the flip side, we are just repeating the exact same process that happened before. And this is just going to keep continuing. As a matter of fact, we've outpaced what the Trump administration has put out under the Biden administration. And in the meantime, a lot of what's happened here, Gizmodo has an article here where the Biden administration says the IPCC does not present sufficient cause to end offshore drilling. Fun fact, it does. It really does. And as a matter of fact, they have taken this opportunity to expand that. We have here President Joe Biden has been touring climate-ravaged areas of America, warning that climate change is a code red emergency for the planet. And yet his administration has continued to boost fossil fuel projects and is now preparing to vastly expand offshore drilling. The White House argues that a court order it opposes is appealing requires federal officials to lease more than 78 million acres of the Gulf of Mexico for fossil fuel exploration. Environmental groups, however, assert that federal law gives the administration broad discretion over whether or not to hold such sales. In fact, Biden officials have instead used that power to officially declare that the warnings in the recent IPCC report does not prevent sufficient cause to reevaluate that drilling plan. As I've gone over, it really does. Now, what's basically happened here is that as Biden has been coming out on a tour of the East Coast to talk about how the areas affected by Hurricane Ida and his own administration basically having to deal with the aftermath of the climate crisis and these increased amounts of disasters that are occurring from it, he came out at the same time and allowed a fossil fuel lease to continue in the Gulf of Mexico that began under President Trump's presidency. Now, a lot of the Republican states, 13 Republican states, including Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Louisiana, Georgia, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, Utah, and West Virginia, sued in order to get this approved. Now, it's kind of been wrapped up in the courts, and a judge order basically had been put out that had said that the law had to be passed. However, the Department of the Interior had claimed that the action did not force them to have to act. And while things were being appealed, they technically didn't. So that was being done in the courts. However, even though that has been wrapped up in the courts and there was nothing pushing the administration, on September 1st, they just completely reversed course and decided to move forward with the approval of the leases in the Gulf of Mexico, saying that the IPCC report would not change its environmental views on the plan. And so a lot of people are calling it what it is, a pandering to both sides. If the administration is going to appeal that order, why not seek a stay to allow them to continue the pause while the appeal is going forward? It's really confusing what's going on here. It's like they're pandering to both sides in a way. And as usual, that's what the Democrats generally do. They put on a good face to talk about how they're actually going to make change happen, and then they end up appealing to Republican and corporate interests. That happens far too often. And in a lot of the science reports that they're looking at 2016 studies when they have analysis over the past 5 years that shows just how bad this drilling is going to affect the entirety of the climate and affect a lot of people. In fact, we've seen how much that's going to be damaged with increases in hurricanes and increased damage to drilling sites. As more and more spills happen, it's going to affect the climate that much more. In addition, drilling all of that oil is going to cause more damage. And the US, of course, isn't the only place that's responsible for this. Trudeau in Canada has been very adamant on keeping drilling happening and talking about how they can't keep oil in the ground. Yes, you can. You can choose not to do that. You can choose not to pull up all that oil. And in the meantime, you've still got cases where even though the the Keystone XL pipeline was shut down by the Biden administration, you still have more lines like Line 3 being built through Canada and through the United States. And this is a continued process that just keeps happening. And, None of this even begins to speak to the failures to significantly address the increased amounts of climate disasters that have occurred in the past year alone, and how to deal with it from an infrastructure perspective. Between the forest fires, the massive hurricanes, the floodings, the droughts, and so much more, how can Biden justify any of these increases and claim that the IPCC doesn't advocate for the stopping of these drilling procedures, while doing nothing to pull his own party together and actually get an infrastructure bill passed that would actually benefit most Americans? He's sitting here talking about bipartisanship and figuring out how to make all of this work in a way that supports the Republican position. And that's not good enough, given that the Republicans and the corporate donors keep wanting to push more and more of the gas and oil out of the ground and hurt the environment at their own benefit and profit. It just seems that his goals are just words, and they really have no meaning as corporate money does the real talking. I'm inclined to believe that actions here speak louder than words, and for Biden, his actions have really gone against what he said. The fact of the matter is that the climate crisis isn't going to resolve itself, and we need to take decisive action to stop it. It seems that the Biden administration just clearly isn't invested in doing so. Conservative Democrats like Biden are just going to keep following this bipartisan idea and are going to continue to capitulate to corporate interests and are not actively going to take a role on actively trying to fix anything involving the climate, as long as it will impact the economy. He may talk a big game to rally his support in the UN and support his voting base and talk about being a world leader, but behind the scenes and when it comes to his actual actions, it's very obvious that he's not the least bit interested in actually doing anything about the climate and just wants to maintain the status quo. In fact, he may be actually making it worse than the status quo by throwing so much more money at the corporations who want to continue to drill and just tossing money at band-aid solutions globally. So with that said, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara, and I thank you for watching.